As I was growing up and I started to read the Bible, I was really confused because going to Catholic school, I was told all the things I was not supposed to do. Here are the sins that you aren't supposed to commit. Here are the things that you're supposed to stay away from. But when I was reading the Bible, I would see the Israelites or some of the major figures in Scripture committing the very things that I was told in Catholic school not to commit. We see Adam and Eve trust the devil over God. We see Cain kill Abel. We see Abraham have an affair with his slave because he doesn't trust God's plan to give him a son. We see Moses lose his temper. We see David plot to have one of his generals killed so he can take his wife for his own. In the New Testament, we see Peter lie and deny Jesus Christ. We see Paul persecuting the Christians and leading them to prison. So it really confused me because on one hand in Catholic school, they're telling me all the things I'm not supposed to do, but in Scripture, I'm seeing the biggest figures in the Old and New Testament falling into the very sins that I'm told not to do. And at first, my explanation for this was maybe God doesn't really care about our sin. And I used that for a while to justify the sin in my own life. But as my faith grew stronger and I reflected on this more, I realized there was a deeper meaning. The first part of it is when we look at the Israelites and how often they fall away from God or they run away from Him, or if we look at characters like David or Peter and how they fall into sin or betray God, what we need to realize is that the Israelites and these figures in Scripture, they are supposed to reflect our actions back at ourselves. So when we see their sin, it should be a reminder of the things we've committed in our life. Because like the Israelites, have we been truly faithful in following God? Or have there been times when we've run away? Have there been times when we've chosen sin over trusting in God who made us, who loved us, and has amazing things in store for us? An example of this, if you look at the Israelites in the book of Exodus, God sets them free after 400 years of slavery in Egypt. After they cross the Red Sea, Moses goes up into the mountains to receive the 10 Commandments. Meanwhile, the people down below, they get bored and they turn their back on God. After everything He has done for them, after He sent one plague after another to make Pharaoh give in and set them free, after God opened up the Red Sea to let the Israelites escape, they turn their back on God and they replace God with a golden calf. And today that might seem a little odd, but there are things today that we do replace God with. A year ago, I was at an Ohio State football game. There were over 110,000 people there. And I think in the last 10 years, the lowest attendance they've had at a game was like 86, 87,000. So every time Ohio State has a home game, you've got an entire city showing up to watch a bunch of 18-year-old kids beat each other up over a leather ball. And it just goes to show that I think we take sports too seriously sometimes. And don't get me wrong, I love sports. Being a runner has been a great and important part of my life, but sometimes we can take it to the extreme and replace God with it. And I realized this because while I was at the game, you see people who they're going crazy, they're excited for a team, go Buckeyes, go defense, they feel every good play, they feel every bad play, and they don't care what they look like. They love being a Buckeye and they're proud of it. But then the next day, when I show up to Sunday Mass, it was a very different experience. All of a sudden, it seems like everyone's too cool to show that they care. You've got people who are mumbling the responses. You've got people who refuse to sing. You've got people who are reading the bulletin instead of listening to Father's homily. You've got people who've got their arms crossed, who've got their hands in their pockets, and it's a completely different experience. And it made me wonder, well, what's our priority? Is it showing up to the football game on Saturday, or is it showing up to Mass and participating in the Mass where we encounter God, our Creator? That's just to show that there are things today that we replace God with. So when we look at the Israelites and we look at their shortcomings, it's a reflection on how we have fallen short. But there's a second part to this, and it's God's part of it. Because despite how much the Israelites fell short, despite how much they turned away from God, after everything He had done for them, God refuses to give up on His people. Even though they fall into sin, God still loves them, and He gives them an opportunity to come back to Him. And if you look at people in Scripture like David, like Peter, like Paul, one of the great things they are known for is that every time they fell short, every time they fell into sin, they came back and accepted God's mercy in their life. And that is an example for us to follow. We aren't perfect. We have brokenness, we have wounds, we have sin in our life. But the reality is is that God is showing us in Scripture, by His love for the Israelites, by the love for these figures in the Old and New Testament, that He never gives up on us. No matter how far gone we think we are, no matter how wounded our heart has been, no matter how much sin we've fallen into, we are never too far gone for the mercy of God to work in our life. And if you look at people like David, like Peter, like Paul, these are people who fell short, but every time they got back up and they ran back to God's mercy. That is the same for us. So why is there all this sin in the Bible? It is first to show us that there are things in our own lives we need to work on. And second, it is to demonstrate that no matter how far gone we think we are, God never gives up on us, and we simply have to turn back to Him to accept His mercy and to change our life for the better.